My message today is about don't make these mistakes, okay? Have you ever heard somebody say that this is the first mistake I've made today? Or someone who's a little more arrogant might say, that's the first mistake I made this year. And of course, someone who is really obnoxious would say, well, that's the first mistake I've ever made in my life. You know, we tend to joke about our mistakes because we all make mistakes. We all make them. We might make them because we have poor information, or because we've had bad judgment, or just because we're making the wrong choices. But mistakes aren't necessarily sin, but they can become sin very easily because of what we call the dynamo effect. One mistake leads to another as we try to excuse or cover up our mistakes. It leads to the domino effect. Soon we're getting in deeper and deeper, and a chain reaction has begun. Now, I'm not an expert in most things, but I am very nearly an expert when it comes to mistakes. I've made enough mistakes in my lifetime to be pretty much make me an expert. Maybe you have too. Amen. So, this morning, I've taken some of my mistakes and I've added some of yours and mixed them all together, and have reached a conclusion that there are at least 4 major categories of mistakes. And all 4 of them are found in the Bible. So you got to kind of listen carefully. And I think that you'll see in each of these 4 areas, each of them 4 areas that I'm going to mention, the first one is panic-prompted mistakes. And first, there are panic-prompted mistakes that are made because we are in too great of a hurry. We're in a hurry. Or because we are afraid that something's going to happen, so we take quick action to try to keep it from happening. We are worried about something, and we are hesitant about letting God take control, so we handle it ourselves, and the result is that we make a mistake. An illustration of that is, do you remember the story of Abraham? God told Abraham to leave his homeland and go to the land that God would show him, where he and his family, they would be greatly blessed. Abraham would become the father of a great nation, and all the nations of the earth would be blessed through him. When Abraham finally got there, he built an altar to God, and God told him, "This is the land that I promise you. Stay here and don't leave this land." Well, time passes, and then we go to Genesis 12:10. It tells us, "Now there was a famine in the land, and Abraham went down to Egypt to live there for a while because the famine was so severe where he was." Now, that is a panic mistake. Abraham had promised God that he would stay put. But when a famine arose, Abraham was afraid that he and his family would starve. So he panicked. He packed his bags and his family, and he moved down to Egypt. First domino fell. The second domino is found in verses 11 and 13. As he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife Sarah, "I know what a beautiful woman you are. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, 'This is his wife.' Then they will kill me, but will let you live. Say that you're my sister, so that I will be treated well, and for your sake, and my life will be spared because of you." That was mistake number 2. And the dominoes are beginning to fall. One mistake led to another, And the first thing that you know, Abraham and Sarah were in a dangerous situation in Egypt, and only the direct intervention of God saved them. So now we have to try to bring it down till today. People make panic-prompted mistakes, and they make them primarily in two areas of life. First, in the area of romance, and second, in the area of finance. How many times have you met people nearing that mystical age of 30 who hadn't met the right someone yet, and they are about to panic? I'm going to be a bachelor, or I'm going to be an old maid the rest of my life. No one will ever marry me. So in panic, they grab the first one. They grab that first one that they find. They get married, or they throw away their morals in the hope of catching someone or anyone. The result is that dynamo chain reaction that makes the situation worse and not much better. I know people who have been there. They made mistakes back when they were 20 or 30, and now they wish they could go back and do it right. Oftentimes it's in the area of romance, where it is 20, 30, or 50 people panic. They all panic. It also can happen in the area of our finances, too. It's so easy today to get into a financial bind. MasterCard works, Visa works, stores, they urge us to use their easy payment plans. Easy payment plans. And the first thing we know, those bills start coming in, and we suddenly realize that we don't have enough money to pay all our bills. So we panic. What do? We run down to the quick loan place and get a bill consolidation loan at lower monthly payments. But the problem is that we now have a little breathing room. So we often start charging all over again. It soon becomes worse than ever, and the dominoes are falling. You see, panic-prompted mistakes often start out as simple mistakes. But like falling dominoes, the momentum gets out of hand, and as a result, it can be very, very disastrous. And number two is mistakes of neglect. We make mistakes because of our neglect. One very clear example of this is King David. David, as you know, was a very special person. He is called a man of God after his own heart. But King David made just as many mistakes as we are capable of making. For example, David had 18 wives. Whoa, boy. And that's a lot of mistakes right there. But notice 1 Kings 1:5 says, and now Adonijah, whose mother was Haggite, put himself forward and said, I will be king. So he got chariots and horses ready with 50 men to run ahead of him. Now, we have to listen to this. And his father, that's David, had never crossed him any time. Actually, the Hebrew word is he's never pained him. What it means is that David never had physical punishment. It never physically punished him, had never disciplined him at any time. The result of that was Adonijah provided selfish and rebellious nature that one day led him to say, I want to be king. And I want to be king right now. I can take the throne away from my father, and I'm going to do it. And one reason that he was that kind of son was because of David's own neglect. David made the same mistake that many of us have made, and maybe are still making. He becomes so busy being king, being important, being an administrator, that he neglects his family. This has happened to a lot of us. This happened to me. Neglect is not limited just to family. It can affect our spiritual lives too. And as I said before, the writer of Hebrews wrote, "Neglect not the assembling of yourselves together, as some are in the habit of doing, but let us encourage one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching." Not giving up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see that day approaching. We gather together to remember Jesus, to examine our own lives in the light of His Word, to rededicate ourselves to what God wants us to be, and to encourage one another in our Christian walk. That is why today's the Lord's Day, an important day. That is why gathering around the Lord's table is such an important event to Christians. As I've talked to people, I've often been told, it is easy to get out of the habit of going to church. That is true. I believe it. We all have kinds of groups to help us. We have all kinds of groups to help us to quit drinking or quit smoking, lose weight. But we don't need an organization to help us quit going to church. It's so easy to get involved with other things and completely neglect our spiritual life and the assembling of ourselves together with fellow Christians. Spiritual neglect is a mistake that leads to sin too. So I have to say, welcome home, child of God. I pray that God and His people will make you feel so needed and wanted here that you will never, ever drift away from North Country Christian Church. And number 3 is unrestrained, disobedient curiosity. Boy, that's a mouthful. In 1 Samuel 28, in verse 1 it says, "In those days the Philistines gathered their forces to fight against Israel. Achish said to David, 'You must understand that you and your men will accompany me in the army.' David said, in 2, 'Then you will see for yourself what your servant can do.' Achish replied, 'Very well, I will make you my bodyguard for life.' Samuel and the medium at Endor. Now Samuel was dead, and all Israel had mourned for him and buried him in his own town of Ramah. Saul had expelled the mediums and spirits from the land. The Philistines assembled and came and set up camp in Shunem. Well, Saul gathered all Israel and set up camp at Gilboa. King Saul is beginning to lose all confidence in himself. He has disobeyed God time and time again, and God is no longer with him. The battles are going against him, and he feels a desperate need to talk with Samuel, the prophet of God, who once was his closest advisor. But Samuel is dead. So what does Saul do? On the basis of bad advice, he disobeys God's clear command, and he consults a spirit medium who claims that she can communicate with the dead. The result is shocking, and King Saul himself is dead within 24 hours. Unrestrained, disobedient curiosity resulted in his death. Unrestrained, disobedient curiosity can well be the primary sin of many young people today. But it's not exclusive just to young people. It isn't. In the teenage world, and even younger, there's so much emphasis on which is evil and satanic, and unrestrained disobedience, curiosity. It can suck you right in. It may begin as a foolish mistake, but it can become a sin that will rob you of your very soul. It'll rob you of your very soul. I believe with all my heart that much of the drug scene is satanic influenced and controlled by Satan today. And if you're playing with that, you're playing with a spiritual world that can grip your soul and squeeze it right to death. Unrestrained, disobedient curiosity, sure, others may do it and tell you that it's perfectly all right. But I have to caution you to be aware of the dangers that are out there and to avoid the evils that can result from unrestrained, disobedient curiosity. Number 4 is the blind spot mistakes. You know, there are blind spot mistakes. Mistakes that we make because we are unable to see ourselves and the situation as it really is. At one time, the Apostle Peter had a blind spot. When he was with Paul and among Gentile Christians in Antioch, he was just one of the groups. Jews and Gentiles were fellow Christians worshiping together. But when ultra-Orthodox Jews who had become Christians, they came to Antioch, they still had their own Jewish prejudice against the Gentiles. So they wouldn't even associate with the Gentiles who had become Christians too. Sadly, Peter, in his eagerness to welcome the new Jewish Christians into the church at Antioch, began meeting exclusively with them and no longer had anything to do with the Gentile Christians that were there. Evidently, Peter had a blind spot about what he was doing. He didn't realize the hurt that this was causing in the church. When Peter saw the division that this was creating, he confronted Peter and said, "What are you doing is wrong. What you're doing is wrong." Suddenly, Peter realized the result of what he had been doing and immediately made it right in the church. Don't we all make blind spots, mistakes? It's so easy to see the mistakes that others make. It's so easy. We go out of church on Sunday morning saying to ourselves, "I sure hope so-and-so paid attention to that sermon," or "I wish that so-and-so had been here. He or she really needed to hear that message." Blind spots. The sermons may have been speaking right to you or to me, and we weren't listening to it because we have a blind spot. We need to open our eyes and realize that there can be blind spots in our lives too. Yours and mine, we all have blind spots. So, what are we going to do about the blind spots? We could go on with this message because we make all kinds of mistakes. But the important question is, what are we going to do about them? What are we going to do about the mistakes that we make? In Psalms 31, I believe for the director of music, it was a Psalm of David. It was a Psalm of music. And it says, in one it says, "In you, Lord, I have taken refuge. Let me never put to shame. Deliver me in your righteousness." In number 2 it says, "Turn your ear to me, come quickly to my rescue. Be my rock of refuge, a strong fortress to save me. Since you are my rock and my fortress, for the sake of your name, lead and guide me." You know, this psalm must have been written by David after he'd really made a bunch of mistakes. So David pours out his heart to God in the Psalms. In verse 2, David pleads with God, "Turn your ear to me. Come quickly to my rescue. Be my rock of refuge, a strong fortress to save me." And in verses 4 and 5 he says, "Free me from the trap that is set for me. You are my refuge. Into your hands I commit my spirit." And then in verse 9 and 10 he says, "Be merciful to me, O Lord, for I am in distress. My eyes grow weak with sorrow, my soul and my body with grief. My life is consumed by anguish, and my years by groaning. My strength fails because of my sins, he says. Do you hear what David is saying? He says, I'm laying it open to you, Lord. Here's all my scars and my scabs and my ugly sores that are there. Here are the sins that I've committed. I can fool others, but I can't fool you, Lord. So here it all is. Here it all is. And God sees the neglect and the immorality in the life of David. But he doesn't say, well, that's it for you, David. If that is what you really are like inside, then you're no longer a man after my heart. I don't want anything more to do with you. But David realizes that God isn't doing that. So in verse 8, David praises him. You have not handed me over to the enemy, but you have set my feet in a spacious place, he tells him. Have you ever felt claustrophobic? When you feel as if your sins have dropped you into a pit? David says that God picked him up and put his feet in spacious place where there was room to move again, to flex his muscles, and to be the kind of person that God wanted him to be. And in verse 19 and 20, David cries out, how great is your goodness, which you have stored up for those who fear you, which you bestow in the sight of man on those who take refuge in you. In the shelter of your presence, you hide them. God hides and forgives and protects all of us. You know, I saw a bumper sticker on a car once that said, Christians aren't perfect, they're just forgiven. I like that. And it says that I'm trying to say, what I'm trying to say this morning is, we're not perfect, but because Jesus says that we can be forgiven. And despite all of our mistakes, and all the things we do wrong, and all the times that we stumble and we fall, God says, come, I want to forgive you. Come, I want to forgive you. Amen.